All right, here we go. This is lesson number 4. We're going to have a writing lesson at the beginning, and then we're going to get into the Great Gatsby, and then we're just going to talk a little bit about the themes present in the debate between Baldwin and Buckley that you guys are supposed to watch between now and our next class. Real quick reminder, our next class will be Tuesday next week. That is Tuesday. That is Tuesday the 8th. We do not have class on Monday. During that class, we're going to be doing our suicide prevention. So the next lesson that you get will hit on Thursday and Friday next week. So this is the last lesson until next Thursday and Friday. On Tuesday next week, we're going to be doing our suicide awareness presentation. So please be present in school, in class for that, because otherwise we'll have to hunt you down and show it to you on your own. Okay. Let's get started. So real quick reminder of what the week structure looks like. We have a beginning of the week lesson and an end of the week lesson. This is the end of the week lesson for the week that starts out September. And a little bit of mindfulness. Just put on some lo-fi. That's nice. It's very peaceful. It's very chill. And that's corn. All right. Yeah, so we have a beginning of the week lesson and an end of the week lesson, and in the middle of the week on Wednesdays, please reach out if you have any questions about the assignments, if you need help with writing. I can help you with writing for non-English class stuff too, like if you're filling out a resume, or if you're trying to get hired somewhere and you're putting in you're trying to fill out their online application form. I can help you with that. I'm straight up an English nerd you have in your back pocket. So just reach out if you need help with the internet stuff. All right, to-dos, stuff that we need by the end of this week, by Saturday. I need you to complete that debate assignment in Google Classroom. It's on the Padlet. All you need to do is post one response. You can respond to all 3 prompts. Some people have already done, which is really cool. But I just need one response for your grade. And then I need that A2C form turned in as soon as possible. We really would like those in by Friday this week. If you need any help, please, please, please ask for assistance. I can give you assistance. I'll be doing assistance in class too. And by next week, we're going to have the standards assignment due at the end of the week next week, and we'll work on that specifically in class on Thursday and Friday next week. All right, so let's look a little bit at what this first standards assignment is. You can do it in 10 different ways. There's a Google form in Google Classroom for you to complete, and when you complete that form, it will give you articles that are aligned to your interests or to your chosen career path out of the 10 career paths. So that's designed that way to make it a little bit more personalized. It's not totally personalized learning yet. That's more like choice-based. We'll get to personalization. This is just kind of me testing to see whether or not y'all can use Google Forms and become comfortable finding your own path out of the 10. So it is due next Saturday. It's due on the 12th. There's one option for each pathway. All you need to do is write a 2-paragraph summary of the article that you choose, and then include 2 quotes in that summary. And I'm going to show you a tool that will help you in doing that on the next slide. All right, so this looks complicated. It looks messy and big, and if you immediately look at this and you're like, well, I ain't doing that, or that's too much, that's too complicated, I got good news. You can simplify the whole thing by just thinking to yourself, I need to write 2 paragraphs. That's 8 sentences total, right? 4 sentences per paragraph if you want minimum. And I need to include a quote from my article in each paragraph. Done. That's the simplified version of the directions. Now, if you struggle to write paragraphs, if you are not a fan of writing, if you need to get back into Fortnite or 2K and you have better things to do, well, I suggest using this tool. It's posted in Google Classroom, and it's basically a fill in the blank. So what you do is take the title of your article. Let's see here. You're going to take the title of your article and put it here, right here. It goes right here after this. And then write the main topic of your article right after that, right in here. Write the first big argument or point that the person being interviewed or the person interviewing or the person writing the article makes right here. Second big point goes right here where this squiggly line is. Third point, and so on. All right, and then you're going to want to include an interesting quote. Type it in right here in this tool. And they give me one more interesting quote. Type it in right here. You don't need a third one unless you just really want to have one. And then the last part is very important for making sure that this is correctly formatted. Put the author's name down here and the year it was published. So you are filling in all of these on the left side, okay? And the reason you're doing that is so that when you get to the right side, you could just paste. So this is a sentence starter tool. It's called a scaffold. It's a sentence starter scaffold. So you're just going to drop the title where it says title here. You'll replace that highlighted word title with the title. You'll drop the topic where it says article topic. You'll drop the first point where it says first point, and so on and so forth. Now, these are mostly just plug and play. You'll be done with all that in 5 minutes, right? There are a few areas where you will have to write your own thoughts. I'm going to use a yellow highlighter real quick. Where it says your explanation goes here, I'm highlighting it right now. You will need to write your own words. Where it says the name of your chosen path here, you will need to reference the path you picked. So like, did you pick the artist or the poet or the innovator or the musician or the gamer or the fittest or any one of those? Where it says the title of your chosen career or interest field goes here, you will need to put that. So if you don't know what your career is going to be, that's totally cool. You're in 11th grade right now. You don't need to know what your lifelong career is going to be. But a field of your interest, something your interest hopefully brought you to this path. And then down here at the bottom also, you'll need to fill in where it's your interest and career choice again. You will need to provide your own explanation. You'll need to argue whether or not your field or your interest area will change, or whether or not you need more research on the topic, and then you'll do one more explanation. So all the parts I just highlighted in yellow, you will need to write new information, but everything else, all the other colored highlights, those are just plug and play. You're just dropping information in from the article that you've chosen. So hopefully this assignment goes fairly quickly for you. It is a 2-paragraph assignment. You can not use this if this is too much complication for 2 paragraphs. You absolutely don't need to use this tool. But if you have historically struggled to produce writing, which is legit, this kind of tool can help you get to 2 paragraphs. Now, when you're done, there shouldn't be a ton of brackets. There shouldn't be a ton of highlighting. The goal will be to format it as just 2 regular paragraphs. Okay, so that is the writing assignment. And at this point, we're going to get into the first part of The Great Gatsby, Chapter 1. And after we read this, or as we read this, we're going to have a little bit of a side conversation. But while we're reading, it's important to understand what we're looking at. So you're not always going to have assignments attached to the guided reading. We're sometimes going to have discussions or assignments. Important to understand while we're going through these readings. This is a read aloud text, so I will be reading this text aloud. The blue words are event notes that can help you build awareness of ACT reading expectations. The ACT is broken up into 2 parts, reading and English. So the blue words are aimed at helping you prepare for that reading part of the ACT. The red words are aimed at helping you prepare for the English part of the ACT. The blue words are aligned to theme, authorial choice. Why did they do that? Character development, and literary devices. And then the red words are aligned to vocab terms, and that ACT English test. Okay, a couple of look-fors as we're going through Chapter 1 of Gatsby. Who has money? Where does the money come from? Like, is it old money or new money? Old money is inherited. You got it from your parents. New money is earned separate from inherited money. How do people live who are wealthy? How do people who live who are poor? And what is F. Scott Fitzgerald saying about these topics with his characters? So this book is primarily aimed at wealth inequality, though it does hit some on race, as we've been discussing James Baldwin and William Buckley. All right, we're going to dive in. And I did put all this together. It starts with a quote. Then wear the gold hat, if that will move her. If you can bounce high, bounce for her too, till she cry, lover, gold-hatted, high-bouncing lover, I must have you, by the fake author Thomas Park d'Invilliers. Whatever. So I got Iron Man here. So we start out with a fake quote of do the great thing for the girl, to get the girl, do the great thing. And that kind of do the great thing to get the girl, that will pop up as we go through the text. It is worth noting that the hat is gold too. And you can draw the wealth imagery out of that. Chapter 1, The Great Gatsby. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. That's our narrator's father speaking to him. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually talkative in a reserved way. And I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me, and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person, and so it came about that in college I was unjustly accused of being a politician, because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Got Batman there. As an example of a wild, unknown man who has secret grief. But our narrator apparently is the kind of person who can just listen. Hopefully you got a friend who just soaks up everything that you say to them, and you can just complain to them for hours. That's kind of the person that our narrator is. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently, I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I am still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. All right, so here we have our author talking more about how people just kind of talk to him and how he's tired of listening to people just sort of confess to him. And the word feigned is our first red term, so feigned meaning pretend, and being an ACT-aligned term for difficulty. And after boasting this way of my tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point I don't care what it's founded on. And this is our narrator. This is Nick Carraway. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous outings with lucky sights into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an honest contempt. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. So riotous being another good, strong ACT-aligned word. And we have our narrator introducing us to Gatsby, where the book gets its name from here. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of the creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I've never found in any other person and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. First off, that last little paragraph section there, that's freaking great writing. And second, we now know something important about Gatsby's character. Nick says that Gatsby has this great gift for hope. He's a romantic. He's a dreamer. And Gatsby does, in fact, represent the American dream. This idea that you can come from nothing and go to something great. And we're going to see that pop up again and again as we go through this text. Who writes, "What foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams"? Who says that? My family, and this is Nick again talking, have been prominent, well-to-do people in this Middle Western city for 3 generations. The Carraways are something of a clan, and we have a tradition that we're descended from the Dukes of Buccleuch. But the actual founder of my line was my grandfather's brother, who came here in '51, sent a substitute to the Civil War, and started the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him, with a special reference to the rather hard-boiled painting that hangs in Father's office. Prominent being your term for the ACT. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father, and a little later I participated in that delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great War. So our narrator, fought in World War I. I enjoyed the counter raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the warm center of the world, the Middle West now seemed like the ragged edge of the universe, so I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it could support one more single man. Bonds are like stocks, like the stock market, like you're buying stocks and bonds. All my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me and finally said, "Why, yes," with very grave, hesitant faces. Father agreed to finance me for a year, and after various delays I came east. Permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22. That's 1922. The practical thing was to find rooms in the city, but it was a warm season, and I just left the country of wide lawns and friendly trees. So when a young man at the office suggested that we take a house together in a commuting town, it sounded like a great idea. He found the house, a weather-beaten cardboard bungalow, at $80 a month. But at the last minute, the firm ordered him to Washington, and I went out to the country alone. Straight up, if you rented a house for $80 a month near New York with a driving distance today, it would probably be like one cardboard box for $80 a month. That is like insanely cheap by today's standards. I had a dog. At least I had him for a few days until he ran away. And an old Dodge. And a Finnish woman who made my bed and cooked breakfast and muttered Finnish wisdom to herself over the electric stove. It was lonely for a day or so until one morning some man, more recently arrived than I, stopped me on the road. "How do you get to West Egg Village?" he asked helplessly. I told him, and as I walked on, I was lonely no longer. I was a guide, a pathfinder, an original settler. He had casually conferred on me the freedom of the neighborhood. All right, Nick's being a little bit sarcastic here. He's like, "Oh man, I was basically a settler," because he wasn't the newest person. So anytime you go somewhere new and someone newer than you comes in, there's this moment where you're like, "Ah, nice. I'm not the newest person anymore." I've felt that before. And so, with the sunshine and the great burst of leaves growing on the trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. There was so much to read for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young breath-giving air. I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit and investment securities, and they stood on my shelf in red and gold like new money from the mint, promising to unfold the shining secrets that only Midas and Morgan and Maecenas knew. And I had the high intention of reading many other books besides. I was rather literary in college. One year I wrote a series of very solemn and obvious editorials for the Yale News, and now I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again the most limited of all specialists, the well-rounded man. This isn't just an epigram. Life is much more successfully looked at from a single window, after all. It was a matter of chance that I should have rented a house in one of the strangest communities in North America. It was on that slender, riotous island, which extends itself due east of New York, and where there are, among other natural curiosities, two unusual formations of land. 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs, identical in contour and separated only by Courtesy Bay, jut out into the most domesticated body of salt water in the Western Hemisphere, the great wet barnyard of Long Island Sound. They're not perfect ovals, like the egg in the Columbus story. They're both crushed flat at the contact end. But their physical resemblance must be a source of perpetual confusion to the gulls that fly overhead. To the wingless, a more arresting phenomenon is their dissimilarity in every particular except shape and size. All right, so this blue here is giving us the setting. So on your screen right now, we have the general setting of The Great Gatsby. Over here on the left, you have New York. So this is the island of New York on the left. And where the narrator lives and where Gatsby lives and where all the other white upper class characters in the text live is this space over here in the pink circle. They live in the eggs. I lived at West Egg, the less fashionable of the two, though this is a most superficial tag to express the bizarre and not a little sinister contrast between them. My house was at the very tip of the egg, only 50 yards from the Sound, and squeezed between two huge places that rented for 12 or 15,000 a season. The one on my right was a colossal affair, by any standard. It was a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side, spanking new under a thin beard of raw ivy, and a marble swimming pool and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. So we just found out that our narrator lives in West Egg. And not only does our narrator live in the West Egg, it's the less fashionable. So the people who live in West Egg, in his mind, aren't as fancy, for whatever reason, as the people who live in East Egg. That house next to him, it was Gatsby's mansion. Or rather, as I didn't know Mr. Gatsby, it was a mansion inhabited by a gentleman of that name. My own house was an eyesore, but it was a small eyesore, and it had been overlooked, so I had a view of the water, a partial view of my neighbor's lawn, and the consoling proximities of millionaires, all for $80 a month. So this is an artist's drawing of Gatsby's mansion, which is just ridiculous. It's giant. It's gaudy. Across the Courtesy Bay, the white palaces of fashionable East Egg glittered along the water, and the history of the summer really begins on the evening I drove over to have dinner with the Tom Buchanans. Daisy was my second cousin, once removed, and I'd known Tom in college, and just after the war I spent 2 days with them in Chicago. Her husband, among various physical accomplishments, had been one of the most powerful Inns that ever played football at New Haven. A national figure, in a way, one of those men who reach such an acute, limited excellence at 21 that everything afterwards savors of anticlimax. That is straight up like a low-key burn. Like, he's saying that Tom here is one of those guys who like peaks at 21 and then like everything afterwards is kind of like, oh man, but back in my football days, he's one of those back in my football days guys. And this person here is Nick's cousin. That's Daisy, who's both of them are very important characters in the text. His family were enormously wealthy. Even in college, this freedom with money was a matter for reproach. But now he'd left Chicago and come east in a fashion that rather took your breath away. For instance, he'd brought down a string of polo ponies from Lake Forest. It was hard to realize that a man in my own generation was wealthy enough to do that. Why they came east, I don't know. They had spent a year in France, for no particular reason, and then drifted here and there unrestfully, wherever people played polo and were rich together. "This was a permanent move," said Daisy over the telephone, but I didn't believe it. I had no sight into Daisy's heart, but I felt that Tom would drift on forever, seeking a little wistfully for the dramatic turbulence of some irrecoverable football game. And again, Nick is like low-key burning Tom, which I'm all about. Tom's a pretty horrible person. We'll get to know Tom, so he's low-key. It's a low-key burn, saying that like he's gonna basically drift his whole life trying to recapture the high he got from his football days. And so it happened that on a warm, windy evening I drove over to East Egg to see two old friends who I scarcely knew at all. Their house was even more elaborate than I expected, a cheerful red and white Georgian colonial mansion overlooking the bay. The lawns started at the beach and ran toward the front door for a quarter of a mile, jumping over sundials and brick walks and burning gardens. Finally, when it reached the house, drifting up the side in bright vines as though from the momentum of its run. The front was broken by a line of French windows, glowing now with reflected gold, and wide open to the warm, windy afternoon, and Tom Buchanan, in riding clothes, was standing with his legs apart on the front porch. Right, that's about as long as the readings will be. We're going to do a quick recap. This is an ungraded recap. Sometimes these will be graded if our small assignment for the week is a literature assignment. We might do graded, but that's kind of how we're going to go through Gatsby. I hope that wasn't too painful for you. I'm going to post a link to that reading in Google Classroom also, so you don't have to listen to me read it if you'd prefer to read it on your own. Real quick though, so if you can answer these event questions, then you listened very well or you took strong notes. And a good way to practice with those red vocabulary words for the ACT is to create complete sentences and then write the part of speech of that vocabulary term after the sentence to kind of help lock it into your mind. So hopefully you can answer the question, who told the narrator that to remember that he has advantages? Who is the narrator? Where does the narrator live, West Egg or East Egg? Who does the narrator describe as having an extraordinary gift for hope and a romantic? Which war did he fight in? Who is he about to eat dinner with? And what is his money situation? And we will continue to return to these. All right, so that was our lit lesson for today. And all we have left is an informational lesson. So hopefully you guys are watching that Baldwin v. Buckley debate or you're reading the transcript. Either of those is absolutely fine. You can watch it or read it, but then please do respond in the Padlet. Again, I think that reading Gatsby just as a discussion of classism and wealth inequality in America is only part of the 2020 conversation. I think it's important to also have big text where we talk about race and racism in America too. All right, so a couple themes in the Buckley debate. I'm going to show you something called annotated quotes. So that's where you take a quote and then you write a 1 to 2 sentence explanation for it. So a reason why we annotate when we're reading informational text is so we can attach our thoughts and our reactions to the text. So then when we write about it later, it's easier to remember how we felt when we first read it. And if you do annotations well, it'll save you a ton of time when you go back to do research papers, because you'll already have your strong arguments and support. So here are a couple of Baldwin themes and quotes. Some of the themes that Baldwin hits on in his speech and during the debate are the concept of two realities in America, on the idea of otherness as a lived experience in America, and on the impact of racism on white people in America. So for the first theme, the two realities in America, I found the quote, I have to put it that way, one sense, one system of reality. So that's a light quote, but that's kind of his introduction to this concept that there are two different realities in America, reality for black folks and reality for white folks historically. This second theme that Baldwin presents is otherness as a lived experience. And I found that quote on page 2 of the transcript. It comes as a great shock around age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover that the flag to which you pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians were you. And then the last theme that I found in the Baldwin debate was the impact of racism on white folks, specifically white Southerners, where Baldwin says on page 3 of the transcript, I suggest that what has happened to white Southerners is in some ways, after all, much worse than what has happened to Negroes there, because Sheriff Clark in Selma, Alabama cannot be considered. No one could be dismissed as a total monster. That's a shortened form of the quote, and I would have included a longer form here, but I ran out of space. He goes on to say that part of the evil of white supremacy is that white people are denied dignity as well, and that white people are denied the ability to identify as white without being seen as or effectively identifying with white supremacy. Because if the state supports white supremacists, then any form of quote-unquote white pride ends up looking like white supremacy because the state has supported and allowed for white supremacy, which sucks. All right, and here are some Buckley themes and quotes. So one of the themes I found in Buckley's arguments was that because James Baldwin is present, it negates his argument of otherness because he has been quote-unquote allowed to speak at Cambridge. And I found that on page 9 of the transcript where Buckley says, but in the meanwhile, I'm saying to you that the engines of concern in the United States are working. The presence of Mr. Baldwin here tonight is in part a reflection of that concern. So Buckley's effectively saying because James Baldwin can be at Cambridge debating with him, racism is quote unquote solved, or it's not a big deal because he could be present having this conversation. And the next theme I found was that America's foundation is its ideals and not its history. And Buckley says, I found that on page 11 of the transcript, where Buckley says, but the fundamental friend of the Negro people in the United States is the good nature and the generosity and is the good wishes, the decency, the fundamental decency that do lie at the reserves of the spirit of the American people. So what Buckley continuously argues, and indeed argued for his entire life, was that the American people are fundamentally decent and that a few bad actors, kind of like in that PBS overview we saw, a few bad eggs, quote unquote. It's familiar language, right, in 2020? It's a few bad eggs who are causing the harm. Next theme that I found in the Buckley was the importance of cultural heritage. And he argues here on page 11 also, and we will fight the issue not only in the Cambridge Union, referencing his speech right that he's giving, but we will fight it as you were once recently called to do so on beaches and on hill and on mountains and on landing grounds. When we will be convinced that just as you, speaking to the students, won the war against a particular threat to civilization, you are nevertheless waging war in favor of and for the benefit of Germans, your own enemies. So Buckley here is presenting a pretty complicated argument. And it's a fairly paternalistic argument. If you're familiar with the word paternalistic, it means treating someone as though you are their parent, or treating them as though you are a father to them or a father figure. So he's being very paternalistic towards the problem of race in America when he says, when we fight against people like Baldwin, when we fight against civil rights in the United States, we are in fact fighting for black people when we fight against civil rights. And it's a complicated idea that I think is very difficult to defend. Themes that I found, you guys can find your own themes as well in the debate. I just kind of wanted to give you an example of themes that I saw. We're definitely going to come in under the 45 minutes that these are mostly going to be lengthwise. On the next lesson, it won't be on. The next lesson won't be on Monday because we are going to do our suicide prevention next week. The next lesson will be on Thursday, and I will catch you guys then. Quick reminder, Make sure that you complete that Padlet assignment. Just one thought about the debate in the Padlet with your name on it, and you'll be golden. Make sure you turn in your A2C form by Friday this week, if at all possible. And next week, we're going to have your first 2-paragraph standards assignment on citing sources due by Saturday. I really hope that you guys have a great weekend. If you don't make it into class on Thursday, we won't have class on Friday. So if you're in my blue class, thank you for watching this, especially because you didn't have class on Friday. Thank you for keeping up with everything and keeping it so that we don't have to do this lesson plus another lesson next week. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I hope that this is valuable for you.